Guess we can start now, huh?
It's give it 1 second. There we go.
Okay.
We're live.
Hello, friends on YouTube, watching our series for our Thursday town halls with candidates leading up to the Republican primary election at the end of this month. My name is Mackie Smith. I'm here working with Chris Knoll, our county party chair. For myself, I serve as our state chair for Utah Young Republicans and help serve on the executive committee for the Salt Lake County GOP. We have a little bit interesting of a breakdown of how we're doing this debate today. No, it is not going to be a 2-on-2 tag team debate, but we're actually covering two separate state house races at once. For State House District 41, we have Steve Aste and Gary Sandberg. And for State House District 46, we have Carolyn Phippen and Jeffrey Stenquist. So welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in I'm going to give it just a quick sec for everyone to who's signing on to our YouTube channel. But just let me go over real quick the ground rules, and then I guess we can just get started. We're going to really cap off answers to questions at 2 minutes per person. So with that, we're going to ask a question. There'll be 8 minutes going through all 4 candidates. We're going to give a hand signal when it's 30 seconds left on someone's time, so that way they can stay within their time constraints. And we do have a timekeeper, and so I will be trying to gently cut you off if it is going over that 2-minute mark. These questions that we're going to be asking were submitted by the candidates and were reviewed by county leadership to reflect the priorities of you as our GOP members for the county. We're going to start off by giving each person 2 minutes to introduce themselves, talk about why they're running, and give their opening statements. We are going to start with House District 41 on this question. And then for future questions, we'll alternate back and forth between 46 going first and House District 41 going first. So without further ado, Gary, can we have you start 2 minutes as your opening statement? And then I will call on each person subsequently.
Absolutely. I'm Gary Sandberg, and I've been a resident of House District 41 for the bulk of my life. So that's over 50 years. And I am running because I think that there are critical issues that are in play at this time that our legislature cannot shirk and must dive into and solve as quickly and as prudently as possible. I consider myself a conservative, but a common sense conservative that is able to reach out to people of all different areas and philosophies. And then we reasonably pull together what I believe will be the best choices based on the various ideas and arguments that are presented. That's how I run my business for in excess of 50 years, and that's how I've tried to raise my family. And I am grateful to be part of this wonderful part of Utah. And I do have a number of key issues. I'm not going to go into those right now, but I was asked to run, and when I am asked to do something and I agree to do it, I do it with all my heart. So that's why I'm here in this very interesting atmosphere.
Thank you, Gary. Steve, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Aste. I am in this race because our state is in trouble and our nation is in trouble. For far too long, we've neglected, as Republicans, to keep watch on this country. We've let it slip so far to the left that it's beyond recognition. I was not asked to run. I felt it in my soul to run because I could no longer sit by and watch what was happening, not only in this state, and yes, it is happening in this state, but in this country. I'm in it with my wife. We prayerfully went about the methodology and asking God if this is the thing that we should do. And the answer was unequivocally yes. I'm in it with everything I have, with every dime I have, with every fiber of my being. I'm in this race. There are a number of issues, and they start right here. They start with election integrity. We do not have fair elections in Utah. We do not have fair elections in this country. I think anyone that has a mind to see knows that in their heart, both here and in our nation. We have a president that's giving our sovereignty or attempting to give our sovereignty away to foreign entities. That's treason in my book. A lot of people need to be held accountable. This is why I'm running. I intend to do that.
Thank you, Steve. Carolyn, can we jump to you?
Certainly. Thank you. Carolyn Phippen, House District 46. I've worked in Utah politics for almost a decade, and I think many of us have noticed in recent years, especially, that there are many who claim conservatism out of expediency and don't really have a commitment to its principles. And I have to say, fiscal conservatism is great, but it's only a part of the equation. And frankly, in Utah, we have a constitutional requirement to balance our budget every year. So being able to do that is wonderful, but only so impressive. It isn't enough. I've noticed over the time that I've worked in Utah politics, something that I think many people are just starting to realize, and that is that there is a safe middle that too many politicians want to remain in and feel that that's enough to get them reelected year after year, rather than really addressing the problems that we face. There are things that we're seeing that parents are starting to wake up to, that individuals within our communities are beginning to see. Our culture is changing in a very degrading way. And in my time working for Speaker Hughes and Senator Lee, I noticed that unlike the two of them, there are many politicians who fail to grasp the reality of what's happening and fail to really understand what it means for our society. And we have in our state legislature a lot of good conservative members, but they too often get watered down by go along to get along placeholder Republicans. And frankly, that just isn't good enough anymore. And as one of the best managed states in the nation, can I just say, I'm sure the deck chairs on the Titanic were very neatly arranged, but management is no substitute for leadership. We need strong conservative leadership in this state, and I can bring that along with a number of other legislators who are serving at this time. If you vote for me, Carolyn Phippen for House 46.
Thank you, Carolyn. Jeff, last but not least.
Yes, so my name is Jeff Stenquist. I've served in the Utah legislature for 4 years now. And prior to that, I served for 12 years on the Draper City Council. And during my time in the legislature, I've been able to support tax relief, other conservative principles. I've stood up for those things very consistently. Just recently, in this last session, I ran a very important piece of legislation working with Treasurer Oakes on creating a new commission to provide better financial oversight for UTA, the Inland Port, the Point of the Mountain Authority, and other state agencies. And I think this is a very needed piece of legislation and an area that we really had kind of a lack of oversight there. I also am spearheading an effort statewide to organize and strategize over our outdoor recreation. That's an emphasis for me as well as other pieces of legislation. I'm on the Transportation Committee. I'm on the Workforce and Economic Development Committees. And so my depth of experience in local government and now state government really provides me with the experience that I need to keep us going in the right direction. As has been stated, Utah scores very highly on just about every measure. And it's because we take a practical conservative approach to making sure that we're keeping things on track. And I want to keep us going in that direction. There are a lot of challenges, but we need to keep going in that direction.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, jumping into some of our questions. This next one, it's similar to your opening statements, but just with a slight nuance. What experience have you had in public service, whether it be military, community service, or voluntary service organizations, that you feel uniquely qualifies you to serve in the state legislature? We'll start with Jeff again, and then work our way back, starting with House District 46, and then have our candidates from 41 chime in.
So as I mentioned, you know, I've spent 4 years on the in the legislature and 12 years on the city council. My children don't remember a time in their lives when I was not serving as an elected official. And I use the word serving because really that's what it is for me. I'm not in this, I don't do this because I want the title, or I want to feel like I need to, you know, have some sort of recognition. This for me is pure public service. And the things that I've been able to learn and the service that I've been able to give really, you know, I can look around my community and around the state and see positive impacts from what I've been able to accomplish. And that's a great thing, but really it's about serving my community and my state. At this point, you know, I've had 2 terms in the legislature now. And so at this point, it gives me a little bit more with that experience, more opportunities to serve and help and accomplish more, but I'm not going to be there forever. 5 years ago, I decided to retire from the city council with no plans to go back into politics, but then was pulled back in 6 months later. And so I'm happy to serve during this part of my life. What I, you know, I've coached mountain bike teams. I've coached, you know, kids. I serve in my church. So yeah, for me, it's all about that service.
Thanks, Jeff. Carolyn?
Yeah, thanks. I, you know, served a mission for my church many years ago. It's been a long time. And I served a mission as the first, with my companion, the first sister missionaries to enter Czechoslovakia after the fall of the Soviet Empire. I saw the destruction that overreaching government wreaks in the lives of individuals, and also in the way that it changes their ability to even be productive as individuals. It changes the way people think when government starts inserting itself into their lives over and over. We're seeing that increasingly in our own society, and we really ought to learn some lessons from history. I have also, as I was home raising my children for 20 years, ran a number of things, ran a scholarship fund for the Suzuki String Institute, the largest string institute in the Western Hemisphere that is located here in Utah. Took care of those scholarships, also ran another nonprofit that was music-based with an individual, with the spouse of an individual who was with the Utah Symphony. And that Cecily, who worked with me on this, was an educator in our Utah schools. And there were some needs that she saw, and I worked with her to meet some of those needs for the students that she had in her classroom and beyond. We expanded the program. My husband funded it. I ran it, and it was an amazing experience. We cooperated with the school in order to implement that. I've also done a number of different things that I would consider public service in my work, serving with various elected officials, Speaker Hughes, Senator Mike Lee, and I'm committed to doing what I can do to make this state better and to preserve what we have, whether it's on a voluntary basis, whether it's my job. I'm committed to doing what I think is right and steering this state in the right direction. And I have never wanted to be an elected official. It's just time to stand up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Gary, we'll have you go, and then we'll go Steve last on this question.
My experience in terms of public service goes back to the late 60s. And I served as a in the U.S. military in the position of a first lieutenant in the 142nd MI Linguist Company, and our unit was one of the first. It was after I was long retired, but was one of the very first units called to Desert Storm, in which they elements of that unit found the boonie boots of Saddam Hussein. And I am very proud of my opportunity to serve for 8.5 years in the 142nd MI. It is a military intelligence unit. It's a linguistics unit, and it had at that time 46 different language capabilities. And now it has become a battalion, so there's well over 100 language capabilities. After that, and that, by the way, was after serving a 2.5-year mission in Sweden, where I got the chance to see socialism in its many people would call its finest form. And I'm here to tell you, it is not that great. But I've also served for 4.5 years on a planning commission, South Salt Lake, and in the Chamber of Commerce. I've had many opportunities to serve, and not to mention as Scoutmaster and other opportunities with the church. But I've loved every one of these opportunities. I look back on them as actually preparing me for this opportunity now to become a representative of District 41.
Thank you, Gary. Steve.
Yes, I wanted to point out that several people have been trying to get in on YouTube, and they're unable to. Is there been a problem with that we know of?
If they go to our link on the website, slcogop.com, Townhall, and then click on this event, it goes right to it. I've been testing it, so I'm not sure why they wouldn't be able to get in.
I'm not either. I'm just getting that word in my ear, so I thought I'd point it out.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Okay. Life is about service. We cannot be truly happy unless we are in service of other people. I learned that at a very early age. At the age of 21, I was accepted as a big brother in the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization of Utah. And at the time, it was the youngest person that was allowed to serve in that capacity. So I mentored a young man, Hispanic young man, for over 2 years on a weekly basis. We would go and do various activities. I would mentor him, and at the young age of 21, well, I needed mentoring as well, but I was able to provide that for him and give him some direction in life where he did not have a father or even a male figure present in his life. I've been involved in several organizations over the years. I've been on the boards of nonprofit organizations raising funds for money to promote artwork. Arnold Freeberg, some of you may know him and what the work he's done, the Washington Prayer at Valley Forge. I was a board member there, raising funds for him and his work. I've also been involved with an organization called Holding Out Help that's based out of Draper for several years. And what it has done, it's run by a woman by the name of Tanya Toole. She rescues people that are trying to get out of polygamy, mostly from the southern Utah area. She's been able to establish a good rapport with the groups down there. And although at very critical times to her, where her life's been in jeopardy, we have been able to get people out of polygamy, educated.
You can finish your sentence, Steve.
Okay. And just to finish up, I'm currently involved with True. It's a sex trafficking and human trafficking organization that's prevalent here in Utah. So,
thanks, Steve. Now that those watching know who you are a little bit better, we're going to dive into the part that I really relish in, which is some of our fine-tuned policy discussions. So the first question we're going to talk about is one that I'm sure we've seen it. Every candidate I think I've seen a poster for in the last 10 years has talked about it here in Utah, and that's the subject of growth and our massive population growth that we're having specifically here in Salt Lake County as the most populous county in the state. So for the question is, managing growth in the county is an issue at the forefront of everyone's minds. What are your ideas for addressing both transportation and infrastructure challenges that we face? Steve, we're going to start with you, and then we'll go to Gary, and then over to District 46.
Growth is a good thing if managed well. Growth says that we're doing well economically here and that people want to live here. I just wish they'd leave their politics at home, because many of them are coming from California, and we don't need more liberal thinkers here. We need to utilize more mass transportation opportunities. We need to continually upgrade our road infrastructure systems along the I-15 corridor and do what we can to encourage more and more people to take the mass transit, to include the front runner, et cetera. There's traffic issues all over the state, and particularly in Cotwood Canyon, there's an issue with traffic when it storms, and that's been a number of suggestions there. And I think that particular area is a combination of things that would involve widening the road in certain places to allow for more passing, parking, better parking, so there can be a more bus transit up the canyon, and also a reservation system needs to be put in place. And I would suggest putting an app together that would alert people in advance of when these reservations are taking place and when they need to actually go to the bus parking facilities. Again, growth is a very good thing, and it's going to be an ongoing problem that we need to address for sure.
Thanks, Steve. Gary.
Many years ago, I think it was under Bangalore, there was a hotly debated issue about growth and how we are able to keep up. Of course, we've done a lot with our I-15, I-215, the Belt Route, et cetera, since then. But one of the things that was brought up in that debate those many years ago was the choke point for our state is going to be water. And the importance of how we manage those natural resources cannot be overstated and should not be neglected by our legislature. It manifests itself right now in the canyons, where we have traffic on ski days that is unmanageable. There are make sense and common sense ways to manage that. One of which I do believe in is let's see if we can't put that reservation system in place. So if there's not a parking place, you don't drive up to the canyon. And that actually serves the needs of the canyons, the resorts, while at the same time managing traffic in and out of the canyons. The other thing is our water resources throughout the state. We're in a position now of having to bring more water into the Great Salt Lake, whereas in that time frame under Bangalore, they passed a $35 million stipend to put pumps in, because my business was on North Temple, and the North Temple River was quite an exciting experience. But those things, and when we impound water for there, it has to come from somewhere else. And we've got to be wise in how we do it. And the wildfires that are facing us right this very summer.
Thank you. Jeff, can we jump to you on this question on growth and transportation and infrastructure challenges?
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the biggest challenges that we have right now can all be put under that umbrella of growth, whether it's transportation infrastructure, housing, water, all of those things. Those are better problems to have than if we were stagnating. But certainly these are challenges that we have to address. And from the state's perspective, oftentimes, the state has a role to play, as well as local governments have a role to play in managing that growth. I think one of the most important things that I'm hearing from our local governments is that they want more help and support when it comes to that transportation infrastructure, and a lot of it comes down to transportation funding. And I sit on the Transportation Policy Committee and also the Transportation Funding Committee, where we oversee our transportation funding. And so we have been able to put large investments toward transportation infrastructure. And since in the past 2 years, we've seen massive growth in remote work. That helps a little bit. I think that's only just going to maybe buy us a little bit of time. We have to stay ahead of that curve, and especially in certain areas of our state where they, as we see growth on the west side, is much more impacted from a transportation perspective than we are even on the east side, even though it's a problem for all of us. So being able to provide those incentives and make sure that we have the right structures in place to provide that transportation infrastructure, and that we're looking ahead to the future, that we're planning ahead. I think we do a good job of that in the state, but we definitely need to stay on top of that. I will mention one thing about water. I think in this last legislative session, I'm told that we did more for water policy in the last legislative session than we probably have in the last 50 years combined. It's definitely a focus of the legislature, but there's still a lot more work to do in that regard.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Carolyn.
Okay, I feel like one of our biggest problems when it comes to transportation has to do, and water, those are the two things that everybody kept mentioning, has to do with the fact that there's an expectation by some powerful people in our state, some in positions of authority, some not, that we will have never-ending growth, and that cities are just going to have to develop high-density housing at a rate decided on by people outside of those cities. There was an attempt this last legislative session to strip local government to a very great degree of land use authority. That was appalling to the residents of District 46. And, there are reasons why that type of authority has always and historically existed with local government. I had a conversation a number of years ago with a member of a city council up north, and she said to me, we need more high density housing. And notice I am not saying affordable housing. It is not affordable housing that our developers are building right now. They truly are making a fortune, and it is unaffordable. But she said, we need more high density housing, but there's so much NIMBYism in our city. And I said, oh, would you mind explaining to me the difference between NIMBYism and self-determination for a community? The name calling is not helpful and doesn't allow us to address the actual issues that people care about, and it doesn't allow communities to grow the way that they want to grow. The people who live within those communities still have property rights, just like the people who purchase land within those communities have property rights. So this authority has to rest with local government. We do not have endless ability to widen roads and to supply water. We need to allow communities to grow as they see fit, and let the market take care of that problem. There's really very little place for government to force that.
Thanks, Carolyn. And as a follow-up, so saying on that same note, Carolyn, this next question, I'm going to give you each 1 minute to answer this one. It's following up on that growth on that housing piece. So in 2021, the legislature passed a law requiring cities to adopt new zoning ordinances to allow accessory dwelling units, ADUs. We call those mother-in-law dwelling units as well. So through zoning, cities are still charged with determining how and where ADUs exist. So as a legislator, what role should you play in working with local municipal leaders to help them accommodate or adopt new ADU laws or zoning laws at the municipal level? Carolyn, we'll start with you and then go back to Jeff. And again, 1 minute on this one.
Okay, great. Yeah, you know what? The legislature passed a law that forced this onto cities. And cities, as you said in that question, as you mentioned, have the ability to determine where and how. There are areas of Draper where we have single family homes in areas that are zoned for single family homes, broken down into 3 illegal rental units, entire neighborhoods. I've had people contact me completely frustrated that this is happening in entire neighborhoods, and the families who purchased property in those neighborhoods are seeing traffic issues. I was told that there was one home in one of these areas that had 12 vehicles. And one ADU, which is permitted, is very different from breaking a very small home on 1/10 of an acre into 3 rental units. And there have been attempts for the state to interfere more than they ought to be interfering, and for some members of our legislature at times to interfere with cities. And that has to remain with the cities.
Thank you, Carolyn. Jeff, your thoughts on ADUs and what role legislators should play with local municipal leaders in their district?
You know, I represented Draper City on the League of Cities and Towns Legislative Policy Committee for 10 years. So for 10 years, I went up to the legislature every week during the legislative session and talked to legislators about this tug of war between personal property rights and local control. And it's a very delicate balance and it's a fight that's always been going on and will continue. The legislature has given cities the ability to tell property owners what they can do with their property and to tax your property. And most cities, I think, do a very good job of managing that and listening to their constituents. Sometimes cities, the state, it's appropriate for the state to maybe step in and provide some guidelines and some oversight into what, how those authorities are applied. But when it comes to property rights, I think that it's just important to make sure, and I respect cities, coming from a city background, that they need to have that ability to, but they ought to, manage that personal property right and make sure that that's a conservative thing that they respect from a conservative perspective.
Thanks, Jeff. Steve, let's jump to you.
Okay, thank you. I think the legislature needs to stay out of the local city's business. I think that in most municipalities, these laws are already in place, and the state legislature does not have the right to determine what happens in individual homes in individual cities. That needs to be left with the cities. I'm in favor of bringing government as local as it can be. And I'd like to see more VRBOs. I'd like to see more mother-in-law apartments, because housing is a problem. I think where we run into problems is in enforcement, where we do have 13 people living in one home. I believe those laws are already on the books in most cases, and they just need to be enforced, and they're not being enforced. So to sum it up, essentially the state legislature has no business in the city, this various city determination on this matter.
Gary, your thoughts?
I want to start by thanking Carolyn for the new word in my vocabulary, NIMBYism. That's not one I'm used much, but I appreciate it, and it certainly touches on what we are doing when we're making a decision that affects other people. That's kind of what our job is in a way. As it pertains to ADUs, I think that some of this is so easily and common sense resolved. If there are 14 cars parked on the street or around, that does not sit well. And I think a local neighborhood ordinance would certainly deal with that. And I would I would really welcome the decision to be made as close to the problem as it can be made. That's how the best decisions are made.
Thank you, Gary. So we're going to pivot now from some of these local issues to more of a topic that many states have been looking to address, and that's on the topic of election security and integrity. What are your ideas concerning the improvement of election integrity here in Utah? As a member of the state legislature, do you feel that state election laws need to be changed or altered? And if so, how would you refine them? Gary, we'll start back with you and then go to Steve after you.
I believe that the election laws as they currently exist are not deficient. I do believe that they need to be focused on and made. There needs to be a scrutiny of voting booths, voting boxes, and making sure that we have people who are legally registered and eligible to vote are the ones that are voting. And aside from that, at least in the state of Utah, I have not personally witnessed a big problem with the voting laws. I think on a national basis, there is solid evidence that things were not done properly, and that some of the shenanigans that went on in the last election should be curtailed and eliminated. But I don't think that we can spend another 10 or 15 or $20 million fighting that election problem. I think we need to focus on what we can do here in Utah, and as such, maybe set an example for the federal government on how to better implement and oversight of public elections.
Thanks, Gary. Steve?
Wow, where do I start? This is fundamental to our democracy. If Utah thinks that we don't have a problem here, they're sorely mistaken. I would point to Gowd's election integrity report. For those of you that know who Gowd is, he's the Republican nominee for county clerk. That'll be vacated by Sherry Swenson this time, and you will see that there is rampant fraud here in Utah. Utah is no example to how elections should be run. They're the antithesis of it. On a national level, the election was stolen. There's no doubt about it. We must spend whatever is necessary to get to the bottom of this issue. Money should not be a part of this issue. It needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. If we lose this fundamental right to our country, we lose our country. It's that simple. And it did not start with this last election. It's been going on for years by both parties. And this is the fundamental issue I'm running on, because as a citizen of the United States, I feel absolutely invalidated by what's happened. We do need to find out what's happened in the last election nationally, and we need to hold those accountable to the fullest extent of the law. This is an absurd atrocity that's happened to our country. And the president that's sitting in the White House now does not belong to be there. And I think there are a number of Utahns that also do not belong in the office that they hold.
Thanks, Steve. Carolyn, for you, same question. What role does the role of the state in terms of election laws, do they need to be changed or altered, and what would you change?
Yeah, there was a bill that this past session, there were a couple of bills dealing with it, one that got killed and revived, and another that got killed. There were some efforts to try to tighten up our laws. I think it's been known my entire adult life, and I'll tell you, I had this conversation with a legislator who was behind the law creating universal mail-in voting. I had a conversation with him 5 or 6 or 7 years ago saying, why in heaven's name would you ever do that? That opens us up for the potential for fraud. And we have a problem in our country. If you go back 2016, we had Hillary Clinton claiming that the election was stolen from her. In 2018, Stacey Abrams in Georgia said that she was the governor and that election was stolen from her. And in 2020, we had the same thing from Trump. We have had Democrats saying this for years. And when a Republican says it, suddenly sweep it under the rug, answer no questions, and we're not even going to discuss it. The fact of the matter is, if we have a society full of people, a free nation full of people who do not have faith in our election system, we will no longer have a free society. We are going to start to see other problems unless questions will be answered, and they will be answered appropriately. And to the point about Gowd's report, there were in Salt Lake County between 14,000, I think it was, and 34,000 votes that nobody can explain where they came from, because they are above and beyond the number of private and protected voters. But yet these are votes that nobody has their name, the names attached to them. So they had to have been within the private and protected voter pot, 117% of the number there. We need to address the problem. We need to work with county clerks to figure out what those specific things are. And we need to pass some laws and tighten things up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Jeff, same question to you.
Yes, so I actually serve on the Government Operations Interim Committee. I did that last year, and I'm currently doing that this year, looking at election laws and ways that we can improve it. I think that elections in Utah are very well run. Our county clerks do an excellent job, and for the most part, it's they're secure and they're accurate. That's not to say that there can't be improvements. And last year, as we reviewed that and we listened to and reviewed some of the concerns that were brought up in those committee hearings, and we're able to talk to the county clerks and understand what the explanations were for some of the concerns that were raised. But out of that conversation, we introduced and passed 4 bills in the legislative session to make some improvements. And I think that there's always improvements that can be made. But overall, I think that we do a very good job in the state of Utah. We just need to continue to stay on top of it and make sure that we're addressing security, transparency. A lot of these elections are, a lot of questions come up about the software and how the ballot machines are run. I happen to be the only legislator in the Utah legislature with a degree in computer science. So I was able to dig in and ask very, very pointed questions and very technical questions, when they were raised about the software. And so those are issues that continue to be looked at. We'll continue to look at it this year in our interim committee, and make whatever improvements we need to.
Thank you. Okay, pivoting to our final 2 questions. Do we all need to stretch for a minute, or just kidding? So recently, the legislator, we're going to talk not too much about COVID, but more about the state's role in public health moving forward. Recently, the legislator overturned the Salt Lake County mask mandate that was passed in late last year, early this year, which received polarizing responses, both of praise and of criticism. Not to touch too much on mask mandate specifically or COVID, but what role should the state have moving forward when public health crises emerge? What went well last time? What needs to change? And what should the state be doing the next time around that there is a public health crisis? Jeff, we'll start with you, and then we'll move to Carolyn.
Yeah, absolutely. Having gone through, been a part of the legislature throughout the whole COVID episode, we learned a lot. We did some things right. We made some mistakes, and I'm sure we'll be looking back for many years at that. And by objective measures, Utah's been ranked #1 in basically our COVID response. We came out of it with, the best economic recovery, fewer days missed by our students, all those kind of things. And it's because we put in place policies that restricted, some of the emergency powers that were held by the executive branch, by local governments. That's the role of the legislature. The legislature is the ultimate policy body for the state of Utah. All of the powers that are given to the executive branch that are given to local governments are delegated from the state, and it's the state legislature that sets those policies. And so I think that we were trying to find that correct balance, because the legislature doesn't react very fast. We need to have that's why we have emergency powers when there are true emergencies. But with the pandemic, we saw that it was a slow moving emergency. So we had 6 special sessions last year to come back and revisit the policy and make sure that we were giving the executive branch the latitude that they needed, but also putting guardrails in place. And I think that overall we did a good job, and the outcome reflects that in terms of our our health outcomes, our education outcomes, our economic outcomes. So but it is the role of the legislature to put those guardrails in place to make sure that those emergency powers are not abused.
Thanks, Jeff. Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to Jeff's point, really, we had executive branches at various levels of government who chose to constantly renew 30-day executive orders. They are given 30 days because of the fact that the branch that is charged with policymaking does move more slowly. And there are sometimes imminent threats and imminent dangers that need to be addressed. Those 30-day orders were re-upped repeatedly. And I will tell you, I worked for the US Senate at the time. And I was told by some officials in this state that was done because they wanted to ensure that they could maximize the amount of federal dollars with all of its strings attached that were flowing into our state. So oftentimes, at least according to some of the people I spoke with who didn't see a problem with it, they were attempting just to get more money, not to actually deal with an emergency when there already was a national emergency declared and there was no need to have these local emergencies for that funding. That is a complete manipulation of the process, and that was very disappointing to me. We have, when it comes to the authority of the state is the ultimate sovereign when it comes to government. The state formed the federal government. State governments also formed local governments and grants them authorities. We addressed earlier the zoning thing. That is an authority that has always, as I mentioned, and historically been granted to local governments, but violation of individual liberties, when that occurs by a local municipal government, the state has the obligation to step in and to right that wrong, because they are the ultimate sovereign when it comes to government in this country.
Thank you, Carolyn. Gary.
Am I back?
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. Ultimately, my feeling is very strongly that we should give up our individual rights very gingerly. And when a mandate comes down, we have to look at it in terms of how dangerous it is going to be for the populace. But I think that this was a manipulation to some degree. And I think that we found that in states where the local government, the state and local government could make choices with regard to how things are percolating along as far as the COVID, the best decisions were made by those states that were closest to it. I believe that that's the way we ought to make our decisions, and that we should be very jealous of our individual rights. We should not just sit back and say, well, somebody up there knows better than I do, because I really don't think that that's always the case. In fact, often it is not the case. And I think that COVID would be an example of that being true. I'm really thinking that one of the comments that was made here is that the severity of the disaster or the pandemic, and it could be any number of things. It could be tornadoes. It could, we lived in a tornado belt, which we do not, thankfully. I mean, there are disasters of that nature that have to be dealt with immediately and dealt with carefully. But we have our own individual rights, and we should not give them up willy-nilly. We need to be knowledgeable before we relinquish any of those rights.
Thank you, Gary. Steve.
Okay, well, let's just say that Utah handled this horribly from the beginning. We had children wearing masks in schools. We shut down our schools for an extended period of time. We did so many things without listening to what the alternatives might be to this. We bought into the concept that this was, and I'll call it a plandemic because that's exactly what it is. This was perpetrated on the world by certain people and perpetuated by local people. And I mean local nationally and at home here in our state. It was a matter of federal dollars where every single death was classified as a COVID death because the federal government was giving them money to classify it that way. That's just inherently wrong and should not happen at all. Now let's talk about what's happening here at home with that. We had the opportunity to pass some real legislation in House Bill 60 this last legislative session. Not only was that shot down, they dragged people out of those meetings thinking they were above reproach, the legislators, and that by wearing a shirt with "We the People" on it was an assault on the legislators up there at the Capitol. This is totally wrong. The legislature needs to stay out of our personal health matters, period.
Thanks, Steve. So follow-up question, and due to time, we're going to make this a lightning round question. So 30 seconds. This comes from Paul Harrison, one of those that is watching. It pertains to the restrictions on business operations. So will you restrict, or what is your opinion on the ability for the state to limit business operations due to a public health policy or a public health response? Steve, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and then each person 30 seconds to answer that one. What role can the government or should the government play when it comes to restricting business operations because of a public health crisis?
Well, they should have very little role, if any at all. I mean, do you know how many businesses they shut down during this COVID thing? It's unconscionable how many people they bankrupted and put out of business. The government is part of the problem. We, the people, are the solution. The government needs to stay out of our business when it comes to these matters. And you could talk to millions of people across this nation and some in this very state, that these kind of regulations by the so-called government that knew what was best for us destroyed them.
Thanks, Gary.
I'm Steve.
Oh, Steve, I'm sorry. I'm pivoting to going to Gary. I'm like reading his name. Sorry about that, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Gary, 30 seconds on that one.
For a minute, I was 30 years younger. Anyway, I am absolutely appalled by some of the actions many of the actions that this pandemic foisted upon the public. Businesses that were shut down, and businesses do not, especially small businesses, which is one that I operate, do not run with gigantic margins that we can just shut down for long periods of time. We just do not have the wherewithal to do that. But there are occasionally situations where the government has a role, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Carolyn?
Yeah, I kind of think we're big boys and girls. I think that if our health or life is being threatened, we can make decisions about whether we should be going to work or not. Most of us have made it, many of us have made it decades upon this earth, while having the ability to make those kinds of judgments. And those judgments will be very individual based. That's why government, a one size fits all solution, doesn't address the nuances that exist among each of us individually. And we need to be trusted to decide whether we think something will kill us or not.
Thanks, Carolyn. Jeff.
So I think the question was specifically about restrictions on businesses. And I think that we need to be very careful about the limitations that we put on businesses and the interference of government in that employee-employer relationship. Obviously, there are guidelines and we have regulations that protect employee rights and employer rights and things like that. But we need to respect, people's personal decisions and people's ability to run their business according to their particular circumstances, because every business has got, different things they have to deal with.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks everyone for letting me do a lightning round, even if I called people by the wrong name. So wrapping up, we want to give you each just a final minute closing statement on why should the voters in your district vote for you. We're going to start with Carolyn and then have Jeff go, and then we'll have Gary and then Steve last. So Carolyn, start out.
Okay, thanks, Mackie. As I said earlier, management is no substitute for leadership. This district, House District 46, previously 51, is used to strong, dynamic, powerful leaders, and it's time to return to a representative who is committed to that style of leadership. When I'm elected, you can count on me to be guided by the principles of conservative action, not just conservative thought. I am a Republican for real, and I will lead for real. Thanks.
Carolyn.
So I'm running for re-election because I think that my experience and the relationships that I've built and the experience that I have, not just protecting conservative principles, I have a proven conservative track record. But I'm also somebody who takes a common sense approach to things. My background is as an engineer. And so I always come with the idea of how can we solve the problems that are before us? How can we make life better for our constituents, for the people of the state of Utah? How can we keep Utah going in the right direction despite our growth, despite people moving in? We want to make sure that we're doing the things and coming up with common sense solutions. And I'm better prepared than ever before to be effective for for this district and to fight for the conservative principles that I have been fighting for years.
Thanks, Jeff. Gary? You're muted, Gary.
You're on mute. Go ahead.
There you go.
I appreciate the chance to answer this question. For the last 2 or 3 elections, this House, our Republican, have chosen a candidate as a developer. And as a developer, that has not been worked well for the election. We've lost every time, and this particular district has been in the hands of the Democrats for decades. I think it's time to change that. I think it's time that we can overcome that problem that we've had in the past. And I think I can speak and reach out to other people, even though I might not agree 100% with them. I have learned that we have to be able to work with people and do so in a civil and respectful manner. And that's what I would bring to the table.
Thank you, Gary. Steve?
For those of you that don't know, I am a real estate developer and have been in the past, so that was directed at me directly. I'll just point out that Donald Trump also was a developer. And I really like the results that we had with him. I may not like him personally so much, but under him, this country ran smoothly. We did not have 10% inflation. We were trusted around the world and respected around the world militarily, among so many other things. So I think the fact that I am a developer really has nothing to do with the job that I will do here. What I want to do is I want to embolden the people. Our government needs to come back to the people. The federal government is bloated beyond recognition. We need to establish a convention of states, which Utah has become the 14th one out of about 19 now. And we need to wrest control back to the local level and away from the federal government. We need to take back our federal lands. 80% of Utah is controlled by the federal government. We can't mine our own minerals. We can't recreate on our own lands. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for jumping in and for participating. And I know the viewers on YouTube really appreciate it, especially being able to answer a couple of their questions that they sent in real time. I will turn it over to Chris, but just public service announcement. The primary election is on June 28th on Tuesday. Mail-in ballots are going out in this next week. So if you have asked for a mail-in ballot, be looking in your mailbox. And get to know these candidates. I know from speaking to each of them, they're very willing to talk with you one-on-one and be able to help you make the best decision you can as a voter. So thanks again to the four of you. Really appreciate your time. Turn it over to Chris, our county party chair, to close.
Hey, thank you, Mackie. I just wanted to take 1 second. I've been sitting here trying to manage some of the communications and things and making sure everything's going well. So it's kind of weird to see me on this, but I wanted to thank you, Mackie, for taking the time to do this, putting this together. Also, Marcy Hausman, you two have really taken the lead on this, and I appreciate that. And I want to thank all of our candidates. I really appreciate all that you're doing. Believe me, I respect every single one of you, and I've learned a lot from this. So thank you, and thank you for standing up and being willing to try to lead. I won't share my opinions, but I have a lot of respect for each of you. Thank you so much. The party, our role is to promote Republicans and our principles, and so I appreciate when you're doing that, when you're out there doing that, and I hope that our voters recognize and look for those principles in each of you. And when they vote, I hope that they're truly identifying those principles and saying, look, this is the person who can best represent that principle, whether it be pro-life or Second Amendment or whatever it might be. That's what we stand for. Those are the things that we stand for as a party. So thank you for attending today. Thank you for listening to the candidates, and thank you for being involved. Thank you again, candidates, and thank you again, Mackie, for all that you've done.
Have a great night, everybody.
Okay, the